The history of African Americans in Maury County, Tennessee is significant. It runs the spectrum from the days of slavery to the modern civil rights era. Within that span of over 200 years, the stories of the events that have taken place here and the people who have called Maury County home have impacted not only this place, but our entire nation and world. For 2 centuries, African Americans have been making a way for themselves by focusing on faith, family, education, and entrepreneurship. Maury County was organized in 1807, and the first official census was taken in 1810. There were about 10 free and 2,600 enslaved African Americans, which represented about 25% of the total population. The African American population had increased to about 28% by 1820 and about 45% by 1860, with 143 people of color recorded. Family and church were important to the enslaved before emancipation, and they saw education as the true path to freedom. With a few exceptions, the opportunity for an education did not exist for enslaved people. After emancipation, faith, family, and education became the center of African American life. Following the Civil War, African American communities were established in Maury County, with schools and businesses created and churches becoming the center of culture. By 1870, the population in 7 of the 25 voting districts was at least 50% African American. Many slaves converted to the Baptist, Methodist, and Presbyterian faiths. Some religious services were held in open fields, on the banks of creeks, or under a brush arbor. 8 churches that were established before emancipation are still active today. Enslaved people could not legally marry in any state. State law considered enslaved property, not legal people who could enter legal contracts, including marriage. Some slaves lived in a nuclear family with a father, mother, and children. In these cases, each family member belonged to the same owner. Others lived in a near-nuclear family, in which the father had an owner different from the mother and children. He might live several miles away and walk to visit the family on some evenings, as his obligation to provide labor for an owner took priority over personal needs. Edmund Kelly, in 1852, was allowed to leave Tennessee to work as an evangelist. For this privilege, he sent his owner $10 per month. Almost immediately, he started raising funds and negotiated the purchase of his wife and 4 children, still kept in bondage in Columbia. On May 29th of 1851, after almost 4 years, his wife, Para Lee, and 4 children arrived in Massachusetts safe and sound. Edmund and Para Lee were married on May 31st, just 2 days later, in 1851. Some slaves learned to read and write from owners or members of owners' families, who taught them either out of kindness or for the advantages a literate slave provided. A violent reaction against any form of education for slaves occurred after Nat Turner, a literate black preacher who drew his inspiration from reading the Bible, led an insurrection in the 1830s. All the slave states except Maryland, Kentucky, and Tennessee passed laws against slaves learning to read and write. The life's work of an enslaved person, in almost all cases, was dictated by the needs of the farm or plantation upon which they worked, unless the enslaved person had special skills. Those with special skills were often rented out to other landowners. Any income generated was given to the owner. Dr. Jack Macon developed a reputation as a healer with remarkable talents. He was permitted to move about the countryside as an itinerant physician. Most of his earnings went to his owner, who sent instructions for those who wished to use Dr. Jack's services. The instructions read, "Those who wish to employ Jack must send me their notes payable to William Macon." John Brown, a free person of color, had a barber shop by 1850. His shop was located on North Main Street in Columbia. In addition to the barber shop, Brown purchased several lots on or near the public square. His home was located at the corner of Garden and West 8th Streets. He loaned money to both black and white citizens in the community. After nearly 2 years of Civil War, about 180,000 former slaves served in the Union Army, with the United States colored troops. There were 166 regiments of black soldiers who fought in approximately 450 battles and were instrumental in helping to win the war. More than 400 men from Murray County volunteered to serve. At least 100 lost their lives while on active duty, including Douglas Anderson, Henry Pickett, and Jeffrey Wilson, who died in the Battle of Nashville. A delegation of ministers from the American Baptist Association, including Edmund Kelly, met with President Abraham Lincoln to get permission to cross the Union lines to minister to the former slaves. Isaiah Hadley, a single man, was supporting his mother and living in a small house on the Hadley plantation in Murray County near Carter's Creek. Isaiah's father had died and his mother suffered from a chronic illness and could not work. In 1863, Isaiah decided to join the Union Army. He arranged to pay a local merchant for any provisions that his mother would need while he was away. In May of 1865, Isaiah died from disease in a military hospital in Nashville. His death left his mother without any means of support. She applied and eventually received a pension. Rufus Estes was the youngest of 9 children. After the war started, 2 of Rufus's brothers joined the Union Army, leaving the young children to do the work. At age 5, Rufus had to carry water from the spring about a quarter of a mile from the house, drive the cows to and from the pastures, and mind the calves. Both brothers died of disease during the war. His mother, distraught over the loss of her sons, moved to Nashville to live with his grandmother. At age 16, Rufus went to work in a restaurant to support his family. He became a chef for various companies affiliated with U.S. Steel Corporation. In 1911, Rufus Estes published Good Things to Eat, the first cookbook ever published by an African-American chef. In 1864, Cap Jordan opened the first school for the enslaved after he received permission from federal soldiers. Later, when the Confederate Army camped in Columbia, he was arrested under an old state law which prevented the enslaved from receiving an education. After the Civil War, enjoying the freedoms as a citizen of the country they fought and some died for was the primary focus of the newly emancipated. Black churches became centerpieces of African American culture and community, not only as places of personal spiritual renewal and communal worship, but also as centers for learning, socializing, and political organization. Black ministers became community leaders. Reverend John Smith Gilmore is one of many former enslaved people who served with the United States colored troops in the Union Army. He returned home to build African American communities in Murray and surrounding counties. In 1866, he and other formerly enslaved established the Richland Creek Baptist Association to have a united family of Baptist churches. In 1870, the Duck River Missionary Baptist Association was established with Reverend Richard Sanderson as the moderator. When a survey was taken in 2016, there were still 33 churches over 100 years old still active in Murray County from many denominations, including African Methodist Episcopal, Church of Christ, Church of God, Methodist Episcopal, Missionary Baptist, Primitive Baptist, United Primitive Baptist, and Presbyterian. The Freedmen's Bureau was established in 1865 by Congress to help millions of former slaves in the South in the aftermath of the Civil War by legalizing marriages, locate lost relatives, assist black veterans, and negotiate contracts. African Americans pooled their resources and expertise to develop organizations within their own partially enclosed world. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the institutional structure of the African American community manifested itself in mutual benefit organizations. The Murray County Colored Orphan Society was organized in the 1870s, and a building was erected near Burns Spring in 1872. In 1905, the Band of Hope was established to encourage and develop the sociability of its members, to elevate them morally and intellectually, to foster good citizenship, to promote their prosperity, to assist them in adversity, to nurse and relieve them of sickness and afflictions, and to see that they were decently and properly buried. In 1870, Congressman Samuel M. Arnell and James P. Baird established the Columbia branch of the Freedmen's Bank in a room over the McGaw livery stable at the corner of North Main and East 6th Streets in Columbia. Meetings were held at the local African American churches to promote the Freedmen's Bank. With assurance that their deposits would be safe, African Americans with a wide variety of backgrounds and occupations opened accounts with the Freedmen's Bank. For many of these depositors, owning a bank account was a great source of pride and excitement. They were, for the first time in their lives, receiving wages for their services. Hospitals gave African American health professionals virtually no opportunity to be trained or practice, and many refused to treat African American patients. In response, African American leaders began establishing African American controlled hospitals. In 1923, A.J. Armstrong, J.H. Kelly, and others established the Murray County Colored Hospital out of a critical need to provide medical care for African Americans in Murray and surrounding counties. Some of the doctors were Drs. Carlton Goodlett and Benjamin Davis. The Murray County Colored Hospital remained in good standing with the Tennessee State Medical Board until it closed in 1954. In the 1960s, Bishop Charlene Smith Ogilvie established the non-denominational Youth Crusade of Murray County, Tennessee. With the support of the St. Peter's Episcopal Church and the Diocese of Tennessee, it was originally housed in the Holy Comforters Episcopal Church located at East 8th and Woodland Streets in Columbia. The staff operated a nursery school, provided meals, and other services that the underprivileged children needed to help them grow and develop into responsible citizens. Learning to read became a symbol of freedom for the formerly enslaved. They saw education as an important step toward achieving equality, independence, and prosperity. The federally funded Freedmen's Bureau was established in 1865 to improve social and economic conditions, as well as build and maintain schools. By October of 1865, there were 9 Freedmen Bureau schools in Murray County, and more than 50% of the teachers were African American males. The number of schools continued to grow in rural communities. In 1872, Professor John H. Kelly moved to Murray County and started a school for African Americans in an orphan's home. The Board of Mayor and Aldermen of Columbia purchased land to build the first colored public school in 1881. In August of 1885, the board suspended the colored school for 10 months and used funds to assist in the building of a new school. In the 1900s, more African American students wanted an education. The colored public school was struggling to cope with the economic strain of supporting the expanding population of school-aged children. The original school was a very basic building with classrooms without indoor toilets or water fountains. John H. Kelly, with other educators and business professionals, started the Murray County Colored Teachers Institute to present methods for those less experienced in the art of teaching. About 100 primary and secondary teachers attended the institute. In 1912, philanthropist Julius Rosenwald gave nationally known educator and activist Booker T. Washington permission to build Tuskegee Institute for the construction of 6 small schools in rural Alabama. Pleased with the results, Rosenwald agreed to fund a larger program for schoolhouse construction based at Tuskegee. By 1920, the Rosenwald Fund established an independent office for the school building program in Nashville. By 1928, 1 in every 5 rural schools for black students in the South was a Rosenwald school. These schools were built with assistance from local African American communities. Murray County's first Rosenwald school was erected in the Godwood community in 1917. By the 1930s, there were 15 Rosenwald schools in Murray County. To address the increase in the number of African American students from the rural communities attending high school and the need for a more modern facility, in 1946, Samuel E. Jones, the principal at College Hill High School, organized the leaders in the African American community and developed plans to raise money to purchase land and build a new high school. Randolph Howell, Building and Trades Director, assisted by Waddell Johnson and Jack Johnson, as well as veterans and students in the community, erected a 12-classroom building with a large combination gymnasium and auditorium and a large vocational shop building. The doors to Carver Smith High School opened to grades 7 through 12 in September of 1948. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled that school segregation was unconstitutional. The long-standing separate but equal doctrine established more than 60 years earlier was overturned. In 1969, more than 15 years after the decision, African Americans still attended segregated schools in Murray County. In the early 1960s, the Murray County School Board closed all African American schools in the rural communities, including the Rosenwald schools. These students were transferred to the African American school in the district where they lived. The rural school teachers were assigned to College Hill Elementary, Carver Smith High, Macedonia Elementary, or Clark Training Schools. The 1968 Hatton versus Murray County School System discrimination case brought attention to the fact that Murray County had not implemented an effective desegregation plan more than 14 years after the 1954 Supreme Court decision. In 1968, U.S. District Judge Frank Gray ordered the Murray County School Board of Education to submit a plan that will lead to the speedy dismantling of the dual education system. The new plan was to assign students to schools based on geographic rezoning. In compliance with a court order, the Murray County School Board decided to close all African American schools. Early records indicate that African American businesses in East Columbia thrived for more than 80 years. A Colored Fair Association was established in almost all counties in Tennessee and in many southern states. The Murray County Colored Fair Association sponsored its first county fair in 1872 and continued for more than 30 years. The Negro Business League of Columbia was established in 1909. This was one of several hundred chapters of the National Negro Business League founded by Booker T. Washington in 1900. Washington believed that solutions to the problem of racial discrimination were primarily economic and that African American entrepreneurship was vital. Booker T. Washington visited Columbia in 1909 and spoke to a record crowd at the Bethel Hotel. The Morton Funeral Home, located in the Columbia Commercial Historic District on East 8th Street, was established in 1891 by James M. Morton during the Jim Crow period of history. Morton died in 1893, and his widow, Mrs. Clara Morton, managed the business until their son Andrew took over the business. After only 6 years of marriage to wife Callie, Andrew died, leaving Callie Hill Morton and a 4-year-old son with the responsibility of the family funerary business. Callie Morton successfully managed the family business during the Jim Crow period of history for almost 25 years. In 1946, when James and Mary Morton were the proprietors, this property was the center of activity during the Columbia Uprising. Historians believe that this post-World War II event was pivotal to the Civil Rights Movement. When James died in 1965, Mary managed the Morton family funerary business until it was sold in the 1990s. In 1896, entrepreneur John W. Johnson purchased a lot with buildings on the corner of South Main Street and East 8th Street. For almost 80 years, this property was leased to both black and white business owners. Entrepreneur and community leader Julius Blair started working as an apprentice barber with his father-in-law, Saul Wilkins, in the Bethel Hotel before establishing his first barbershop on the northeast corner of the public square in the late 1800s. He had barbershops near the railroad depot and on the northwest corner of the public square before moving to East 8th Street. The Blairs owned a drugstore and several other businesses. In 1984, 12 establishments located on East 8th Street between South Main and Woodland Streets were listed on the National Register of Historic Places as contributing to the historic significance of the downtown Columbia Commercial Business District. Ultimately, the history of African Americans in Murray County is one of success, despite periods of turmoil and events filled with strife and national racism. The people that called this place home navigated that strife and found an avenue to become educated, find religion, start businesses, and contribute to their community. That resilience is still seen and felt today, for the Murray Countyans of our past have provided a legacy worth remembering.